The Nordics punch above their weight in tech, and corporate venture capital is no exception. Francesco Di Lorenzo takes us through the latest data and trends on how the region's CVCs are evolving. From Sweden to Denmark, we'll see what's working, where challenges remain, and why Nordic corporates are some of the best partners in Europe's venture scene.
All right, so last but not the least, I guess. So my role here is that actually to give a summary reflection. But the more I attend in the morning, the more I thought I'm not going to deliver that. And the reason why is because I learned a lot this morning. So prepared slides to give you a summary of the day actually was impossible. So I also took some few notes, and I'm going to share some insights that I thought is important to keep as point of reflections of a beautiful event as such, a really impressive event, as well as some notes that I took on the way, okay, to somehow opening more questions than answers, okay. So first of all, we talked a lot about CVC. It's called EUVCVC, but CVC just maybe the most important at the moment, but just one of the tools that corporates can use to deal with startups, right? Collaborate, interact, tend to grow, okay? So if you look at recent reports, actually it's very clear that if you look at the left panel, there's a lot of possibilities, CVC, incubator, venture clienting, and on the right-hand side of the panel on the left, there are the corporate objectives. You cannot really see a pattern for any of this, right? So corporate seems to be, on the one end, confused, one could say, which tool to use for which results, okay, to achieve. On the other hand, in fact, might be just like a curiosity to explore the boundaries of these different strategies that I can actually implement, right? And the question could be, are they mutually exclusive? Do you think in a compartmental way and think about those as separated, or there's a need for an integration, right? So if you look at on the right panel, one view could be using the time, right? So over the time of the corporate innovation strategy, different tool can be operated, right? But it's actually true that the previous one become obsolete, right? Maybe doing an innovation program for startup as an accelerator or incubator might be good in early stage, maybe investment come later. But how about combining a small investment with direct incubation, right, from the very beginning? So these are all questions that, looking even descriptively as this panel, we still have open on the table, okay? We talk about CVC, okay? I have a few slides about this. I'm not going to go through that because I think some colleagues have been doing much better job in showing you already trends that become fairly much repetitive, but this is what we call the CVC effect, okay? So it's also been mentioned a little while ago, right? So the corporate comes in, I think actually the last panel mentioned that. So an independent venture capital firms knows a lot about investing, but when it comes to the deep technology, they might fall a little bit short, right? So what we observe in the trend in the VC industry is that there is a lot of hiring happening from private sector and corporate into VC firms to exactly bring their expertise, right? On the other way around, this trend does not compensate for all the need of technical knowledge. So the CVC come in and say, hey, I might actually give you $1 as opposed to the $8 that on average globally in the last 30 years VC have deployed in a startup, right? But they're going to bring you all this, what we call kind of the asset and resources. So pilot possibilities or proof of concept or distribution channel, right? All those things that a VC can actually not provide. So one of the questions that I have here, right, is this hybrid model that I try to combine kind of a VC company running the VC job with a kind of a corporate unit that actually focuses only on what is actually needed inside the solution, the right combination, right? So this we don't know, right? At the moment we look at this phenomenon as there's a CVC company, there's a VC, and they kind of collaborate in a cap table. But maybe that collaboration can be built in planning the investment early on by the corporate, in fact, right? So there are a few examples doing this, even in this room. That's fundamentally how to bring together money and the assets, okay? So we saw these slides before, right? Corporate actually very important. Second ranked investor globally always, okay? In the last 30 years. Big interesting going up in the volume of investment. That's very fascinating, okay? And if you look at from an industry cross-sections in the fundamental years, you can see that energy drives a lot of this investment. While most of the industry have been contracting, actually energy still keep up. And it's something that we're going to see also in the Nordics when we take a snapshot of our region. How do we measure, right? So this morning people talk about measurements. Oh, is this a successful CVC or is not? right? So the 3.7 years of duration of a unit might be very well explained because it's very hard to translate into results all those activities in venturing, right? So this is not surprising because if you map, right, all the possible metrics used by corporate, but even startup to say was actually a good deal to make a collaboration with or any sort of investment deal with a corporate, is very confusing. And if you look at the plus and minus, this is a summary of the last 20 years research about what did work and what is not, and mostly on US data, because I agree with some of the previous panelists saying that this game is fairly majorly placed in the US, in North America. We have a little bit of confusion. So once again, it's not surprising, right, that TMT, so top leaders in a corporate, at some point they say, well, we are on the minus swing, so we're going to terminate the unit. If you're on the plus swing, then we're going to keep the unit, right? So, but selling a formula for success, it might not be just as easy as inventing startup, and that is going to work, okay? So then they open the question about what are the boundary conditions, okay? So why and when does it work, okay? So if I have to summarize again for you as in a big, if you wish, message, it works mostly, okay, when the startup and the corporate, they build some sort of collaborative device beyond the investment, okay? For example, in my own research, we see that if you actually take engineers and send from the corporate, even temporaneously, not even kind of a transfer as an employment, right? Just for 6 months or even 1 year, engineer from the corporate to develop the product with the startup is much more impactful than investing an additional millions of euros in the startup, okay? So this is, for example, one device. Or another one could be board members. Board members can be kind of a double-edged sword, but actually most board members have been proven to open up a lot of commercial possibilities, okay? So do money become smart when they're deployed? The answer is no. To be smart money from corporate, we have to still work the organizational elements of it, meaning exchanging engineers, exchanging marketing experts, giving possibility to the startup to access to the real resources, okay? Not just the money. So for you corporate guys, when you think about doing that, think about how to beg for the money from the CFO, but also think also about the operations who can actually support you to make the investment successful, okay? Because that's what tweak actually the positive results. Who is now the new boy in the hood, you can say, venture clienting? I haven't really heard, I've heard about in the breaks, but I haven't really heard this one. Of course, the focus was CVC. But this is actually the new upcoming strategy for dealing with startup as a corporate. So instead of investing money, what you can do, you can actually go and say, hey, I become a client of yours, right? I give you a contract. Right, that should stabilize in somehow evaluation, give a signal to the VC market, right? And that seems to be good. And the good news for corporate is that you don't have to put a penny on the table, right? That could be enough to make a commercial contract, right? However, if you actually think a little bit more deeply about this, venture clienting could be as critical and as risky as CVC. In fact, you might not put much capex, but there's a lot of opex and operation that get involved in venture clienting, right? So corporate must be collaborating to develop the solution that they want to develop from the startup, right? That takes operational times, meaning a lot of governance to put in place. That costs money, costs time, is risky, right? Then, who is actually creating the solution? Is a BU creating the solution, or is it top-down? Some units out there that goes and say, oh, wow, that could be very useful to my colleague developing the water pipes, right? But do they really need that? Do they tell you exactly what they need? So again, there is actually quite a better risk than rather going investing in a startup and bringing to the VU and say, well, but I don't need that, right? So you still don't need that anyway, even if you treat it as a client, right? And finally, which startup will end up having a heavy client on their commercial agreement list while you're still looking for financing? And maybe corporate later on might actually be disregarded. I can tell you from my own data, actually in the Nordics, right, that the probability of having a commercial partner while you get a heavy Series A or later corporate investor, it's actually decreased over time. And the more the power given to this corporate, in fact, it makes not only less likely that a new investor comes in, but also the current investor with less equity to go out. So this means that in somehow corporate might actually not be necessarily the best client early on, okay? So long story short here to say, for those of us that are thinking of venture clienting as a cheaper way to do venturing as opposed to CVC, be careful, because think well about the risk that it can imply as well, okay? So what's next? Okay, so this is what I've been thinking about it, and I'm gonna give you a little bit of preview. This is something that is dear to some of the people in the room already mentioned before, right? And this is the point, okay? So 3.7 years, 4 years, the duration of a CVC unit, right? Why, right? This is correlate probably 0.99 with the duration of a CEO in the office, right? So when CEO probably get substituted, a unit of CVC also get either terminated or reshuffled in the organization, right? So what do we need to actually make this objective of innovation lasting and be attained, right? Probably moving from skin into the game, from board into the game. So the board, a very top-down commitment from the board has to happen to protect the unit, right? And the investment in startups or the collaboration, right? Across time. Okay, because any strategic change cannot terminate activities that might actually take 3, 4, 5 years, okay, to show results. Okay, what's next? Intermediaries. Okay, so I love the point about the network of CVC. Does it work? Actually, from data very freshly cooked, I can telling you that what happened there is that corporate only go with other corporates when it's not really fundamental for the core business, right? So CVC is still a strategic tool for compete and not too much to collaborate. So keep this on in mind when we think also about all these events, okay? How and what are we networking on? And then there are plenty of elements that we haven't explored yet. How a venture getting steps, okay? So in a way, it's different than a CFO is a promoter of it, or the R&D director, or the CEO. That will change a lot. We know very little about it. And among other things, I'm telling you, timing is very important. Getting a CVC early on might make a startup better for innovation, but very not so good for IPO evaluation. And actually, it's the other opposite around for later stage. However, if getting later stage boards, which is very normal, will decrease revenue of a startup on average, right? And revert back to R&D investment. Why? Of course, the corporate does not come for your peanuts as revenues as a venture, but comes to learn from the venture. So there is a lot of friction into that, right? And the last thing that I want to mention here, very interestingly so, is multiple CVC, right? Multiple CVC happen mostly sequentially, as the panel on the right suggests you. This means that there's going to be some power dynamics, okay, in the cap table that has to be taken into account, okay? So this is something emerging, and this happened very much into the Nordics. I want to give you some preview. We did a report, and we're still working, they send it over in Norway, and now we send it also in Finland and Sweden to get the picture, okay? So what we can see here is lots of corporate have a unit, lots of corporate do it for strategic reason, and innovation, specialized technology product solution is what they look for when investing in startup, okay? In the end, the idea is to co-invest for 43% of the cases, which is kind of fascinating, okay? And many of them, they take a board position, and what they believe they give to the startup is the idea that the scalability is very important for them, so the startup must be scalable is very, very important, okay? Small portfolios and early stage mostly, okay? This might reflect the idea that there's not many big tickets to pay. And eventually, what's the problem that the unit encounter in the dealing with the corporate, the startup, and the unit is bureaucracy from the parent, right? So lots of units found that one as a primary limitation to carry it out, much more investment, much more collaboration, okay? So this speaks to me to a very clear message, which is we need to change the culture in the boardroom, okay? So the boardrooms and the TMT must change the view of what venturing is, which is an investment in entrepreneurial mindset, and not only acquiring a short-term solution that might make the return on investment or our, in general, EBITDA better, okay? And these are some comparison with the preliminary results that we have on the Norway and Denmark together. Again, hopefully soon giving you more about the other two states. Couple of points here that people mention. AI, everybody mentioned about AI. I want to mention about AI. Most of the corporate we studied in the last 20 years, SP 500, most of the corporate, the more invest in a startup in AI, the less invest internally. So then it's not surprising, right? Invest internal AI solution. This means that fundamentally corporate are externalizing the understanding of AI, which could create a kind of friction when it comes to having this very deep tech startup in the house, and then we don't know how to leverage them, okay? This is kind of very interesting that I want to leave here, and lots of more data. I'm here available. Thank you very much for today, and thank you for the great event.